privilege of spending my junior year of college at the university when I chose to have 10 Israeli roommates because when else could, and I realized that there was another choice lurking behind that, which was you can choose an Israeli roommate who wants to live with an American person who wants to polish his English, or you can find the other maybe sure the other maybe 10% who are indifferent to English and who will let me polish my Hebrew. So that's what I did.
I just came up with a language driver who's from Jordan, so I could practice my Arabic.
Uh-huh.
My teacher will be very proud.
Very
Even
good.
though I could barely understand him because he's a Bedouin from Jordan. Very
Yeah,
Palestinian, yeah.
Yeah, well, we do what we do. I mean, we need to be flexible, have a flexible mindset and a flexible ear, and that's all part of coexistence.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm never going to be able to speak as well as most others.
No, but you'll be able to understand them and to make yourself. Should I do something with your coat?
It was in the rabbi's office, and I kind of walked out with it.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening.
So I'll put it in the rabbi's office.
Good evening, everyone. We welcome you all, and we're glad to see you all with us tonight. We are very pleased to have award-winning journalist, academic, and lecturer Eetta Prince-Gibson, who was previously the editor of one of my favorite publications, the Jerusalem Report, who's currently the Israel editor for Moment magazine, and she's a regular contributor to the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, The Forward, Hadassah magazine, Foreign Affairs, and other Israeli and international publications. Eetta has been awarded many prestigious awards, including the Clarion Award, the National Religion Writers Award, the Search for Common Ground Award, and a variety of others. She's taught political science and gender studies at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem and at Brandeis University, and has received many awards from both those universities for her original research and her excellence in teaching. So, Eetta, we're very delighted to have you with us tonight. We welcome you to the Jewish Community Center, Paramus, Congregation Beth Tikva. Before we invite Ms. Prince-Gibson forward, I'm going to explain how the program is going to be conducted this evening. Eetta will be presenting for a while, and then we'll have the opportunity to engage in question and answers with Eetta. Those who are with us here in the building can raise their hands and ask your questions directly, if you wish. For those who are joining us via live stream, you may email your questions to me at my email address, rabbi@jccparamus.org. Again, let me repeat that for you all. It's rabbi@jccparamus.org. And I would also like to add your questions to the ones that we will present to Eetta for her answers, her analysis, and her opinions. But at this time, my great pleasure to call forward at this time and to welcome to our congregation, Eetta Prince-Gibson. Welcome.
Thank you. Am I on? Okay. Thank you, Rabbi, for that very kind introduction. Thank you all for coming out, and thank you all who are on the stream. I hope that by presenting to you some of my thoughts and ideas and opinions, what I really want to do in this talk and in general is to promote a dialogue about the challenges and the opportunities that are facing Israel and the American Jewish community at this time as a result of the elections and as a result of all the changes that we're all going through. As you know, Israel voted 2 weeks ago In many ways, it was indeed a celebration of democracy. In Jerusalem, it was a really wonderful day. The sun was shining, the weather was at its best. Those of you who know Jerusalem know that a fall day in Jerusalem is rare and delightful. In my neighborhood, it's a small neighborhood in South Jerusalem where both Arabs and Jews live and vote. It's a block party. People bring coffee and people are high-fiving each other. We make a lot of jokes all the time about how often we vote because, as you know, this was the 5th election in 3.5 years. So there were votes about that voting in Israel is like IKEA. You can pick it out, but you can't put it together. We had Seinfeld soup Nazi. Instead, we had the political Nazi who says, politicians, go away. No elections now for you. Come back in 4 years. We talked about Groundhog Day a lot. And here we go again, with Bill Murray standing there saying, it's election day again. And we thought we were very funny. One of the lovely things is we vote so often. We see babies and we see, oh, he's grown so much, because it's like 6 months ago. There was also a very high turnout, more seriously. The turnout is of over 71% across most sectors in the Israeli public. It's a welcome sign that Israeli citizens remain engaged in politics and want to say in determining the direction of the country, even though we vote so often. You would think that people would get sick of this. It was an election day despite the divisions in Israel, and I'll talk about this in a minute. It's a division without almost any interruptions or incidents. Things went very smoothly. And yeah, in some ways it was really a celebration of democracy. But not everybody is celebrating. Israel is a very fractured, divided society. And this is where I want to tell you where I'm coming from. In a divided society, I believe that neutrality is neither possible nor desirable. I don't believe journalists are, quote, objective in the sense that they can be as if they were not involved. Things move us. We experience things. What I will try to be is fair, which is very, very different. The presentation I will bring you tonight is my presentation. It's my views, my concerns as an Israeli Jew, as a Zionist, as a feminist. I'm the daughter of a modern Orthodox rabbi who grew up in Europe. I grew up, when he came to first Canada and then to the United States, in a conservative synagogue, and today I'm an active and committed Reform Jew. I'm the daughter of refugees who escaped Europe, and I'm not celebrating because I think that the values that I believe in are threatened, and I'm very concerned. Again, this is my take. What's most important that I'll be presenting to you, what's most important is that we can open a dialogue between us. And one of the things that concerns me, as I'll say in a bit, about Israel is can we bridge the divide between us, or the divides between us? And I'm concerned in the American Jewish community if we and you can bridge the divides among us as well. I think some of the things that you must care about are also going to be very different. First of all, the Kotel Agreement, the agreement for equality. In the Kotel, or what we call the Traichitza, there's a Mechitza, so we want 3 of them, one for the egalitarian prayers, will not go through. I mean, we can count on that. That's not going to happen, and the little that there is will probably, they've already said they will remove the little that there is. And I think that we're going to see that NGOs, non-governmental organizations, some of which some of you may support, may feel threatened. And certainly Palestinian citizens of Israel are going to feel threatened. I don't think there's going to be anything happening immediately, but I am concerned. At the same time as being very concerned, I'm also very, very determined. And together with concerned Jews like you, I think we can turn Israel still into the country that we all believe in. And so what I'm going to try to do is be fair, be analytic, bring what I know as a journalist and an academic and an activist, but I'll also share my opinions and my concerns. First, I'll tell you how the Israeli system works. What are the takeaways from the election? And obviously, in a brief presentation, it's not all the takeaways and it's not everything. It's the ones that I want to highlight, that I'm concerned about. And what we can do. And what I think are the challenges that we face. So first of all, how does Israel vote? The first thing you have to know is that Israelis vote with little pieces of paper. Startup Nation votes by putting a piece of paper into an envelope, which is put in a box, which is then hand counted. So we actually don't have results till later. I have pictures that show that the voting booths of 2022 look very much like the voting booths of 1949, which is kind of strange. The structure of the government is kind of the classic structure of a parliamentary government. That means that there's the Knesset, which has 120 members. The Knesset ultimately elects the prime minister. However, the way it works is that you need to know one number, 61. 61 is the magic number. It's a necessary requirement. It's not a sufficient requirement to have a functioning government, but it is the necessary one. Why? Because a majority of 120 is 61. So in a lot of ways, Israeli politics is about arithmetic. We do not vote for individuals. We vote for parties. And that means that it's all proportionate to the number of votes cast, okay? Not to some arbitrary number. In theory, of course, if a party were to get 50% of the vote, they would receive 60 seats in the Knesset. If they were to get 70% of the vote, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A caveat. To be part of the Knesset, though, each party must pass a threshold of 3.25% of the votes cast. What that means is that there are no parties anymore of less than 4 seats. Okay? Until a few years ago, there were parties with 1 seat, 2 seats. You can imagine that it was even crazier than it is now. 61, simple majority. In the country's history, no single party ever won 61 seats. The largest that anybody ever won was Golda Meir back in 1969, and she only got 56 seats, and that was considered, wow. Usually in the elections, somewhere around 40 parties run, and usually about 10 get in, 10 to 15. In the 2021 elections, 39 parties ran and 13 parties made it in. In this election, 40 parties ran and 10 made it in. So we have 10 parties in the Knesset. The head of the party with the most votes, usually, but not always, becomes the would-be prime minister, and this man, must try to form alliances with other parties in order to cobble together his 61. This is necessary, of course, because if the government that he puts together and the ministers that he assigns don't receive the confidence of the Knesset can vote them out. This is the whole checks and balances within, but what you can see is that it leans very heavily towards the strength of the majority. If you have a significant majority in the Knesset, you can pretty much do a lot, pretty much what you want. But the permutations sometimes for a coalition government are almost infinite. Small parties can become kingmakers. They enjoy disproportionate power, as we're going to see. This leads, and this is what you're seeing now, to weeks of negotiations, horse trading, backroom deals, power-sharing promises that everybody knows are never going to be kept. As you know right now, Netanyahu, former and current, or as we like to say in Israel, the once and future king, Netanyahu received, his party received 34 seats, was tasked in the usual procedure by the president with putting together his government. Right now, he had thought he would call the government this week, and there are a lot of problems. So I'm going to, which I did not do yesterday when I spoke, I am going to put a little bit of a question mark here if the government is actually going to be formed. You'll see why some of the demands are outrageous. On the other hand, nobody wants to be the party responsible for sending the country back into elections, into a sixth election. You know, this is a lot of been there, done that. And a party that will topple the would-be government into elections will not be popular. What we have is a government that Netanyahu can easily put together. He would have 64 seats. That's a comfortable majority. But the demands are going to be a little extreme, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, let me give you a little background how we got to elections this time. As I said, 61 is the magic number. It's the requirement, but it's not the sufficient. Because if you only add up to 61, then any single member of the government can, I don't mean blackmail in the corruption sense, but certainly say, you know, if you don't do what I want, I will leave the government and you're left. I will leave the party that is part of the 61 seats. The government will fall. Ostensibly, the reason the government fell this time was because some of the hospitals had agreed that non-kosher for Pesach food could be brought in for Muslims and would be put in a certain area that would be chametz. Needless to say, Muslims do not observe Pesach. The nominal reason that the government fell was that. However, what really happened was, in 2021, former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, who actually only held 6 seats, he wasn't the majority party, but, you know, go figure, it's Israeli politics. He did the arithmetic and added up to 81. He put together a very diverse coalition. And in many ways, everybody was pleased. Or not everyone, people on the center left, I should say, were pleased because it was so diverse. For the first time, it included an Arab member of parliament, an Arab member of the cabinet, and an Arab party in the coalition. That had not happened ever before. However, the diversity was so great, and the parties were so different from each other that eventually the coalition simply imploded from its own diversity, and we had elections again a year and a half after the previous ones. So what were these elections about? Well, let me tell you what they weren't about. They weren't about the peace process. They weren't about inflation. They weren't about Jerusalem. They weren't about Iran or the climate crisis or the degradation of services. They weren't about the increase in violence both by Jews and by Palestinians. No, they weren't about any of this. Initially, they were about simply one thing. which was about, as we call it, to be or not to be, meaning should Netanyahu, whom everyone refers to as Bibi, who is on trial for corruption charges, including breach of trust, is fit to be a prime minister. As the elections proceeded, or the campaign proceeded, and it was actually a very short campaign. It's important to know that also, because one of the things that happens is the campaign was cut off by the Chagim. Once elections are called, they have to be within 90 days. But of those 90 days, we had Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. If anybody's ever been to Israel, we have what we call the Chagim, the holidays, which pretty much means that the month of Tishrei, from Rosh Hashanah until after Sukkot, is dead. Nobody does anything. And so nobody was campaigning. There's no point. Nobody listens. So it was a very short and very intense campaign of a few weeks. What we have now is 4 parties that are forming the coalition. There's Netanyahu's party. There's the 3rd largest party in Israel and the 2nd largest party now in the coalition, which is called Religious Zionism. It's a combination of 3 smaller parties, but it's actually dominated by one of its constituent groups, known as Jewish Power. That party is headed by neo-Kahanist Itamar Ben-Gvir. They have 14 seats, making them, as I said, a very strong party in the Knesset. The other 2 parties are Shas, which are the ultra-Orthodox representing the Mizrahi or the Sephardi ultra-Orthodox community, and United Torah Judaism, which is also a combination of several Ashkenazi Haredi parties. So comment number 1 about the coalition that's going to be formed is that we can see that other than the Likud, these are parties that have staked out fairly extreme positions. And I'll tell you some of these positions in a moment. But I also want to point something else out. In some ways, it was a landslide, of course. 64 out of 120 in Israel is considered a large majority because we're so fractured. But if you take into account 2 parties on the center left that almost made it in, remember I told you about the threshold, and they were just short of that threshold, and you add them up, what you really see is that there are 48.92% of the country that voted for center and center-left parties, and 48.36% that voted for the right and the ultra-religious parties. That is basically a very serious divide. Because of the arithmetic, that's not what we're going to see in the government. So a government that is going to be looking at more extreme positions is also going to be a government that's facing tremendous opposition, because close to 50% of the population really doesn't agree. The distortion or the anomaly between the number of seats and the government and the popular vote, and legalists here will please forgive me because the analogy is limited, but it's somewhat like the way the Electoral College doesn't reflect always the popular vote, and the arithmetic plays out sometimes in different ways. That's what we're seeing here. Because of that arithmetic, it's not going to be reflected, and I am very concerned that since there are only 4 parties, the 2nd largest one, as I said, is an extremist party headed by somebody who is an avowed and open supporter of Mayor Kahane. who didn't serve in the military because he was rejected from the army because he was considered too extreme as a teenager. He is calling for the Ministry of basically the Ministry of the Police, Internal Defense. And another member of that party who didn't serve in the army is demanding to be Minister of Defense. So we're going to have people who have no experience, if this happens, doing issues of the military. About the members of the ultra-Orthodox committee, they are asking, among other seats, for the education portfolio. These are the same people who are insistent that their schools, that the ultra-Orthodox schools, and of course you know about this from the expose that was also recently in the New York Times a few weeks ago, don't want to study history, math, or English, or science. And they're calling to have the education ministry. What do we learn from these results? Well, what we learn, I think, first of all, let's look at some very simple political science explanations. Elections in countries that are highly divided aren't decided only by ideology. They're decided by tactics. In the end, this becomes arithmetic. You kind of figure where do you invest your energies. It's not all so ideological as it used to be, and that's a problem with a party system. Netanyahu is an excellent politician. Whatever else anybody else thinks of him, he is one of the best campaigners ever. He's certainly able, he just won his 6th election as prime minister. You got to be good to do that. However, he built a political strategy on breaking down the political community into antagonistic tribes. He incited all the time against anybody who didn't agree with him, basically the center left. He also cut deals, and these are coming out now, with all sorts of parties about what they would get and what they wouldn't get if they supported him, in some cases if they didn't run. In fact, it was Netanyahu who convinced the 3 parties that form religious Zionism to run as a bloc, as a single party, because if they ran separately, they might not pass the threshold. And he knew that they would support him as prime minister. He also gave them legitimacy. Only a few weeks ago, in a television interview, he was asked this was before the elections, of course, if Ben Gvir, the person I said who's heading this, who's heading the religious Zionism, could be a member of his coalition. And he said he could be a member of the coalition, but he was not fit for ministerial office. In the last few days before the elections, as he realized that he had no chance of a government if he didn't have them in, he said, of course he could be a minister in his government. Another political science type explanation for these results is that we lost 130,000 votes to parties that didn't get in, including, remember I told you 40 parties ran. You know, we have this saying about 2 Jews, 3 opinions. We have 120 seats, 40 parties running. But that's 130,000 votes that went to parties like the Pirates Party. There really is a Pirates Party in Israel. And I have to tell you, in preparation for these talks, I really did try to find out what they stand for. And I still don't know. But they got several thousand votes. And I think that we should look at those as lost votes, but also wonder what's it saying if 130,000 people are voting for strange, off-the-edge parties. Also, as I said, more seriously, and they're not included in the 130,000, there were close to 250,000 votes that went to Meretz and Balad. Balad is an Arab party, and Meretz is a left-wing Israeli party. Both of them came exceptionally close to crossing the threshold. Another explanation I could give you for some of this is, of course, this is what the world is looking like. You could look at, until very recently, and I don't think he's out of the picture yet, Bolsonaro in Brazil, Viktor Orban in Hungary, Duda in Poland, Meloni in Italy, Le Pen in France. You know, the world is turning in certain ways, at least certain parts of the world. Duterte in the Philippines. And if Israel is supposed to be a light unto the nations, but also a nation like all other nations, which was the understanding of the state of Israel, its dual role, then I guess we get to have our demagogues and populist leaders too, just like the other countries. But I want to try to, and all of these are explanations, and there are explanations that you'll see written about, but I want to offer you a more complex and a more specific to Israel analysis. First, I want to go back to the voter turnout. Israel has more elections right now than any other country in the world. We top Greece and Spain. Everybody used to think Greece was the most unstable country. Nope, we won. And, you know, the joke about whether it was Al Capone or Richard Daley who said, vote early and vote often. And that we also complained, everybody complained, on the left and the right, that the elections had become math. You know, all you cared about was that the party you wanted got enough votes. You didn't even care anymore what their platform was. And the Likud, the largest party, Netanyahu's party, actually didn't publish a platform. So you do know what they stand for, but not if you wanted to go through a platform. No, do they have particular stands that you know about on specific issues, okay? In my own home, my husband and I were concerned about two parties that we were concerned wouldn't pass the threshold. So we decided one of us would vote for one and one would vote for the other. And we flipped a coin. And I didn't get to vote for the party I want, but I went earlier, so I did what I wanted and told him that he was stuck. But you understand that these became cynical jokes, or more importantly, heartless, unhappy, soulless elections. And yet 71% of the population voted. Why? And what were they offered? Well, let's see what they were offered. The center-left ran a campaign with no focus on its many achievements as part of the coalition. They'd been in office for a year and a half. They'd done some things very well, even if you didn't agree with their positions. And some things, they cleaned up the economy. The minister of religion had broken some of the monopolies over who could give kashrut certification. And as we all know, a monopoly is often an invitation to corruption. And by breaking those monopolies, he was opening up the field. Israel handled the pandemic, including the subsequent rounds of the last year and a half, very well, etc. Instead, when it became clear that the center-left might not have a majority, they ran what is called a Gewalt campaign. The word is used in Yiddish and Hebrew. In other words, it's called Bchirot Gewalt elections. Even one of the Arab parties that did get in used the term Gewalt, the Yiddish word in Arabic. And that's not an encouragement to vote for you. They were saying, give me a Hail Mary pass, basically. God help us, just vote for us so we can be in. Don't ask why, just do it. Because you can't believe that Meretz or the Labor Party or this party or that party won't be in the government. That would be terrible, wouldn't it? Or that Yamina from the right, that actually didn't even come close. But, you have to vote for me because otherwise I'm not going to be in. There was also a very dismissive campaign on the part of the center-left, not only against Bibi, but against what we call Bibism, which is kind of like the dismissive attitude towards Trumpism. It's not an attitude towards a position, it's an attitude towards the people who uphold those ideas, and presented them as dumb automatrons who just support their leader. Bow down to King Bibi. And obviously that did not go over very well and did not encourage people to vote for them. And in the United States, in sociology, this is referred to as the great paradox. It's the assumption by certain elites that people are voting against their best interests. And if they only saw the light, they would vote according to what and I hope you know I'm being cynical about this, right? What the elites know is better. People don't like being told that, not surprisingly. People do not like being told that they are paranoid, that they don't know what their best interests are. People do not like being told that they don't get it, that they're dumb. And so I think we saw a lot of protest vote. But we are also seeing a rise of the right. And let there be no doubt, this man that I'm mentioning several times, Ben-Gvir, follows the teachings of Meir Kahane. He was convicted by an Israeli court in 2007 of incitement to riot. Before Rabin was assassinated, some of you may have seen the clip of him holding a symbol, it's called on a car, the symbol. Yeah, the thing that says like Toyota or whatever it is, that he took off the car and he was holding it and says to the public, we got to Rabin's car, we can get to Rabin. Rabin was assassinated 3 weeks later. I am not in any way accusing him of pulling the trigger, but I am saying it was part of the atmosphere that allowed that to happen. Those are really very horrible days in Israel. I don't think people are voting for the religious Zionism party because they've become ideologically very far to the right. I think that the right provided clear messages, simple messages, messages that play to our fears, and that worked. They believe the strongest message that comes across is the message in strength, the belief that strength is both a means and an end. Strength, Jewish power, is what we must strive for. Not quality, but strength. Nothing is higher than this. I think that it speaks very strongly to the paradoxical position that many Jews feel in the modern world of this combination of superiority with victimhood. We believe that we are the chosen people. We're also the people who are often chosen to be the victims. If you look at the events, for instance, of the Holocaust and then 1967, Israel's victory, I think we see that there's this duality in many collective feelings, and they spoke to this. I think they're also speaking to the fears that many of us have in Israel that are left over from the second Intifada, as well as the riots of May 2021. In May 2021, there was unrest, sectarian unrest between Arabs and Jews in the mixed cities. 2 Arabs and 2 Jews were killed, hundreds were injured, and thousands, mostly Arabs, were arrested. Among the Arabs, this fueled a sense of discrimination, but among Jews, it created a fear of the enemy within. If people who had lived alongside of us could suddenly explode in this kind of violence, the Arabs were saying that about the Jews, but the Jews were also saying that about the Arabs. If you could suddenly explode in violence, what does this mean about Israel's minority? What does it mean in terms of loyalty to the state? And remember that the previous government included an Arab party in the government, which the right played on by saying, how can you count on an Arab party? Look what they did to us in 2021. I'll be honest with you for a moment about my own experiences. I don't live in a mixed city. Mixed cities are primarily Haifa, Nazareth, Lud, Beersheba to a certain extent, less so. Ramle. I live in Jerusalem. It's a mixed neighborhood, but it's an upscale neighborhood. But I remember the second Intifada. My daughter was in junior high. My son was in his last year of grade school. And it was scary to go out. It was scary that a bus might blow up at any moment. There were months when something went off somewhere in the country every day. And the feeling of getting into bed at the end of the day and saying nobody I know or love was hurt. Okay, it was an okay day. Can't be a good day because somebody else was hurt, but at least it was an okay day. I remember riding a bus for a story, and just to tell you how crazy it all was, and this is only, 20 years ago. This is not something that has disappeared from our psyches. So I rode the 18 bus, which is the infamous bus that took the most hits in Jerusalem. I took a cab to the bus stop that I was going to ride on, and then got off and took a cab home, not a bus. And as I was sitting on the bus, 2 ambulances zoomed by. And everybody stops for a moment. And we all knew the drill. The drill is, if it's only one set of ambulances, it's not anything. People need ambulances. So everybody said, it's probably just a heart attack. That was how crazy it was, that there wasn't we were waiting for the whole set. And I had a day when I thought my children were close to something and may have been involved in something that exploded. Spoiler, they're fine and they were nowhere there, and I had the wrong information. But I didn't know it. And I was so scared. And I remember the phones crash. First they crash because everybody tries to phone everybody else. But then the systems are shut down. The cell phone systems are shut down because cell phones have been used to attack first responders, setting off a second series of bombs. And I remember the feeling of saying, I don't care what the government or the army does. You can carpet bomb the West Bank. Just keep my children and my family and my loved ones safe. And then I was able to say to myself, oh my God, I can't believe I felt that way. Okay, I can acknowledge the feeling, but remember, I have umpteen years of education that teaches me how to separate feelings from thoughts and do all sorts of Descartesian divisions, clear political articulated beliefs, and privilege and a sense of mastery, and an inherent cynicism, or at least I doubt things. It comes from academia, it comes from being a journalist. So I could doubt myself as well and say, this isn't who I want to be. What about if you don't have agency? What if you don't have the opportunity to take a taxi to write about a bus? The majority of people who were hurt in the Intifada were actually people from lower socioeconomic strata and younger people who rode buses. So they played on that, and all of that got worse in 2021. They also brought up something else that I think Israel has to start to deal with, which is the issue of Israel, what we call Jewish or Israeli. Unfortunately, the definition of Jewish has become Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox Judaism, as opposed to the Judaism that many of us believe in, I assume, in this room. Because of that, the center left gave it up. The center left doesn't talk about Jewishness, and it kind of all divided. The center left doesn't talk about Judaism, it talks about Israelism, democracy, human rights, as though they have no grounding in Judaism. And the right talks about Judaism as halakha and the Jewish state, meaning a state in which halakha is binding, as though there's no need for human or collective rights. And we divided it up that way, and that was not healthy. These are my concerns about the situation that we're in now. One is for our legal system. The legal system in Israel is under terrible threat right now. One of the things that the ultra-Orthodox parties are demanding, the rabbis have told them to demand this and not to go in the government unless they get it, is to annul the breach of trust law. Now, Netanyahu is under trial, among other things, for breach of trust. And it's true, so the legal people say, that the law is fuzzy and not too clear. But annulling it and not replacing it, or repealing it and not replacing it with anything else, is giving Netanyahu a get-out-of-jail-free card. Because we don't have a jury system, we have a judge system, and no judge is going to continue a trial on a law that no longer exists. That's absurd. You can't try somebody on, that's, what does that mean? Retroactive trial? So it's a get-out-of-jail-free card. It will also make him completely beholden to the parties that gave him this. This is about as close as you can get without money changing hands to, certainly, it's not bribery, but it certainly is a form of it. We're also concerned about something called the override clause, and you're going to be reading a lot about it if it happens. We don't have a constitution, but over the years, a set of basic laws were enacted that the Supreme Court came to see as the basis for a constitution and as the basis for the structure of the relationships between the branches of government and between the way the government can introduce particularly programs. Basically, of course, this became a way to avoid the tyranny of the majority. It became a way to enforce human rights. It became a way to say to the government, you can't do this. And the basis of you can't do this is a basic law that the Knesset passed. Okay? Quasi-constitution. What they want to do, right, all four parties that form the government are in favor of this. What they want to do is to pass what is known as the override law. The override law means that if the Supreme Court knocks down anything, a law or a program or an abuse of rights, the Knesset can then reword or repeal or simply enact another law that will say that the Supreme Court was wrong and this is okay. And since the government will have a majority, they'll be able to do it. Let me tell you that this would be very similar to removing the right of judicial review from the Supreme Court. What if the Supreme Court said this is unconstitutional? Okay, Congress simply changes the Constitution. No problem. That's what we're looking at. These are people who truly, truly believe in majority rule. Majority rule is, of course, a principle of democracy, but it's not the only principle. What happened to protection for the minority? What happened to morality or social values as well? Lest you think that this is just provocative, The people promoting this are people like Simcha Rotman, who's a member of Knesset, who's a member of the Israel Law and Liberty Center, which on its website says that it takes its inspiration from the Federalist Society in the United States. For those of you who know the Federalist Society, among other things, promoted judges such and takes credit for Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett. But besides the Federalist Society versus, a more open court, the override clause will strip the Israeli courts of any ability to rule on just about anything. The courts will become meaningless, even possibly in issues of criminal offense. I'm worried about Israel's foreign policy. A few weeks ago, the United States brokered a maritime demarcation deal between Israel and Lebanon. Netanyahu and members of his party have said that they will reconsider whether to honor Israel's signature on that law. Why? Because Israel had to compromise. And as Jews, we should not have to compromise. Well, a maritime demarcation law, by definition, is going to involve compromise, obviously. As opposed to what other people saw, what I saw was, whoa, it took the United States to do it. But we actually had recognition by Lebanon of our rights. We compromised, but it's a deal, and it was signed. Lebanon recognized us. That's a big deal. I think that they're going to force a reckoning with the U.S.-Israel relationship as well. We've already seen that the government is saying, the American administration is saying that they're not sure whom they'll meet, which people they'll meet with. Ambassador Nides did not deny what he would do in terms of meeting certain ministers. In a statement on November 3rd, right after the elections, State Department spokesman Ned Price said, what makes this Washington-Jerusalem relationship so strong, and what has made it strong since Israel's independence to this day, is that it is always based on our shared interests, and more importantly, our shared values. We hope that all Israeli government officials will continue to share the values of an open democratic society, including tolerance and respect for all in civil society and particularly minority groups. But last week, Ben-Gvir attended a memorial service for Kahana, in which he said that Kahana, he doesn't believe everything Kahana said, but Kahana was misunderstood because he was really about love. That is what he said, and the State Department said, celebrating the legacy of a terrorist organization is abhorrent. We urge all parties to maintain calm, exercise restraint, and refrain from any actions that only serve to exacerbate tensions, and that includes Jerusalem. He's referring by this, among other things, to an incident in which at a demonstration about 2 or 3 weeks before the elections, Ben-Gvir and a bunch of people from his party went to a demonstration in East Jerusalem where there were Israeli Jews, Israeli Arabs, and East Jerusalemites, and said he felt threatened, so he pulled a gun. In the middle of a demonstration, he pulled out a gun. That he thinks that's okay, and I don't know if any of you saw in the Israeli press, it made a big deal. The wives of future or potential ministers met today. One of the wives appeared with a gun stuck into her skirt, because as a Jew she should be defending herself at all times. I already told you I'm worried about the ministers. They don't have the qualifications to do this. United Torah Judaism, the Ashkenazi, said that the first thing they're going to do is they are going to increase the subsidies to the ultra-Orthodox men studying in yeshivas when we know that this is already having a disastrous effect. Over 50% of ultra-Orthodox men do not work, at least not above the table, and they're living on subsidies, which means that the rest of us is supporting them, and that can't go on forever. You can't have a non-productive sector in your society that keeps growing and is non-productive by declaration. But the second thing he said is Israel had cut the taxes on paper plates and soft drinks. But it increased taxes on paper plates as a symbol of environmental consciousness. As a religious man, he's going to cut the tax on the paper plates because the ultra-Orthodox have large families and they can't wash dishes. This is the kind of stuff we're hearing. Not less serious, Rabbi Yitzhak Goldknopf, who's head of the Agudat Yisrael faction of the United Torah Judaism, mocked interviewers on a main TV show and said, "What has math done for Israel? Why should we have to teach math? Math doesn't do anything, and it hasn't done anything for this country. Israel's salvation is in prayer, not mathematics. Teach children to pray and to study Torah." I'm worried there'll be no peace process. There hasn't been for a long time, so that's not just this government, but that will continue. I'm worried about the kind of country we're going to live in. What are our priorities? What are our values? There are only 9 women in all of these parties that are forming the government. 9 women will be in the Knesset from the coalition. That's quite a step down. It's less than half of what we have. One of the members of the religious Zionism runs on an anti-gay platform, organized what he called the Beast Parade that ran parallel to to Jerusalem's Gay Pride Parade. Last year, the Ministry of Health pushed through a bill canceling conversion therapy. They've already announced that they will reinstate conversion therapy, have it paid for by the public health system, and rabbis will be allowed to perform conversion therapy whether or not they've had any training. So what are we looking at? Are we going to roll back rights for the minority women, LGBTQ citizens? As a liberal Jew, what does that mean for those of us who belong to, as I said, I belong to a Reform congregation. Some of you may know, Kol Shema in Jerusalem. What the conservative congregations in Jerusalem, what does that mean for us? Lastly, I want to talk about an equation made by David Hartman, the founder of the Hartman Institute, who talks about the need for a balance between the Judaism of Auschwitz and the Judaism of Sinai. The Judaism of Auschwitz is the Judaism that knows that we must survive. The Judaism of Sinai is the Judaism that knows that the most common or most repeated commandment in the Torah are the commandments that relate to compassion for the other, for the stranger, for the widow, for the orphan, for the other. Obviously, you need a balance between these, but what will that balance be? And how will we be able to, one that gives you hope and one that tells you to hold on? I'm very concerned about relations with the American Jewish community. Ben-Gvir has already brought up to change the grandfather clause under the law of return. The grandfather clause, of course, is that anybody who had a Jewish grandfather or grandmother can be considered a Jew. If they change that, what it will mean is it will refer ultimately also to conversions by non-Orthodox denominations. because you won't be able to be grandfathered. So if, for instance, somebody here wanted to their child wanted to marry an Israeli Jew, and their grandmother converted to Judaism, that means we're looking at a third generation that grew up as a Jew, knows herself to be a Jew, and she wants to marry this young woman. I'm actually thinking of a real case. And she wants to marry an Israeli. She will not be eligible for the right of the law of return to Israel. She will not be considered a Jew in Israel, and she will not be permitted to marry in Israel. That will have significant effects on the relationships, obviously, between the American Jewish community. It also means that ultra-Orthodox rabbis are going to be deciding who's Jewish and who isn't. And I think many of us are not comfortable with that, with them being the sole proprietors of who's Jewish and who isn't. What will your support for Israel be? Well, we already know that some are abandoning Israel, and there's even a sense of glee. I told you it's a state like this. We said it's a racist state, and so this is proof. There are those who are saying it. You've seen it in the press. There are those who are calling for blind support. Israel, right or wrong, whether we like this government or not, this is the government we got. And we support Israel no matter what. We're pro-Israel. As you know, the conservative movement at the conference last week already came out with a very strong statement calling on the Israeli government not to appoint Ben-Gvir as a minister. So I think that this idea of Israel, right or wrong, is beginning to break down. I can tell you what it means to me to be pro-Israel. To me, being pro-Israel, of course, means supporting Israel when we are threatened by external forces and when we are unjustly accused in the courts of world opinion or world discourse. But it also means to see when Israel is threatened from within and to speak up. And to speak up of your values. In fact, I think love of Israel is a reason to be critical. In Vayikra, in Leviticus, we're told, "Thou shalt not hate thy brother in thy heart. Thou shalt surely rebuke your neighbor and not bear sin because of him." In other words, it's the awareness and the awareness of love and commitment that make it possible to re-examine and to be critical. It's easy to be critical when you don't care. I believe you do care. When the results were announced, and I was actually at the airport when the exit polls came out, because we voted and then my husband and I came here. I was watching what was going on in the airport, and half of the people were jumping up and down, and the exit polls are known to be usually fairly good. And the other half were talking about, there goes my country. And my husband said, who was born and bred in Israel and fought in both the 73 and the 1982 First Lebanon War, said, this isn't the country I grew up in. And in my bubble of Facebook and the papers that I read, there was a lot of despair and what I'm leaving, all this. It's gone. What we have now is a determination. It's really interesting to watch that Israel is the country that we believe in. It's the country we're committed to. It's the country that is the Jewish people's country. It's not the country of one group, one denomination. The Reform in Israel have a saying, there's more than one way to be a Jew. And in Israel right now, there are more than 250 groups working actively on democracy and education and inclusion, democracy. I know you read about Jerusalem, for instance, and I have to admit sometimes I'm part of this corpus of information about how Jerusalem is intolerant and has all these demonstrations and violence, and all of that's true. But at the same time, Jerusalem, and that people aren't seeing, thanks to grassroots groups, is an amazing place to live. There are arts and music and meetings and joint this and joint that. You can't get into an Arabic course to study Arabic unless you register like 3 weeks before they even announce it. All the courses are oversubscribed. You can't get into a Hebrew course either, unless, as an Arab, unless you sign up very, very early. People are trying to understand. People are working. There are over 250 groups currently working on coexistence, on education between ultra-Orthodox Jews and secular Jews, all this activity. And I think that this is where you all come in, is to support these grassroots efforts, to choose the one that you believe in or that you wish, and to be part of it. Israel's an experiment. We're not even 100 years old. That's kind of like toddlers in history. It's the land where we speak Hebrew, we write in Hebrew, we have access to the sources. Little kids play dodgeball, and the dodgeball that they play, the name for the game is Chayei Sarah. And the reason for that is, for those of you who know, in the parasha of Chayei Sarah, Sarah dies. So Chayei Sarah is because you're out, if you got hit by the dodgeball. And when you ask little kids why, a lot of them will say, oh, because Sarah died. When you read it, it's something that you all believe in too, because it's part of us. I'm asking you to push the debate, write letters to the editor, create panels, allow the questions that I'm presenting here to be brought up in your communities. Together, I believe we can come to a better time here and at home. And thank you very much for listening.
First, I want to thank Eetta Prince-Gibson for her words, her explanations, and her analysis of Israel's recent elections. We have some time for some question and answers, but before we do, I just want to remind you all that minyan tonight will take place on Zoom at 8:30. For those who would like to stay in the synagogue and join us on the minyan for Zoom, you may do so, or from your homes for those who are on live stream. But we have a few minutes for questions. I've received a few from those on live stream, but if anybody who's here in the sanctuary would like to begin with a question, please raise your hand. And so, yes, please.
We found you were obviously an intelligent, articulate spokesperson for your position. There was one thing, though, that I wasn't clear on. It seemed as if you were arguing against yourself. On the one hand, you referred to the tyranny of the majority when you were discussing this scheme to create this super law so that the Knesset could snap its fingers and reverse a judicial decision. Happen to be an attorney by trade, I would have an issue with that. On the other hand, you also seem to be referring to something that I would call the tyranny of the minority, which is when, let's say, obviously you live in a very starkly divided social, political climate, as you admitted, as we do in the U.S., left and right talk at each other, and basically the numbers are identical. So who's ever a little bit in front is going to scramble to bring on whatever peripheral parties are going to push them across that magic 61 line that you referred to. So my question to you control of the majority snapping its fingers. On the other hand, you seem to disagree with the party closest to the majority seeking out and acceding to the wishes of these fractious minorities. Could you speak to that issue?
Well, first of all, you brought up, of course, that I did express my opinions, and I would encourage you to invite other people to express other opinions. I can't represent something that I don't believe in, and therefore that's what I meant about opening up the debate, is exactly that. And you're right, it's hard, and I know a lot of synagogues don't want to do that, and I want to thank you very much for the opportunity, because I know there are a lot of places where you can't even talk about Israel from the Bima. I think what we have to do is come to a better synthesis. Rather than, I win by one seat, so I get to impose on you, or you win by one seat, you can impose on me. That isn't working. It hasn't worked here, it's not working in Israel. We can have an illiberal democracy, that's Hungary, and it'll stay stable until it won't. That's not an answer either, and people don't flourish in illiberal democracies. What I'm calling for is discussion. I'm also calling for a line that we can draw within which we can agree. There has to be some middle ground within which we can all agree, and I don't know how we reach that. I don't know how I come to an agreement with somebody who equates LGBTQ with bestiality. I really don't know where we meet in that. What I can do is convince them that you have to leave space there for people that you don't agree with. I think that probably, just like Goldknopf said, what do we need to teach math for? We have to find a way to talk to each other. You're right. Obviously, to be very honest, I think like most of us, I'd like it to be exactly what I like. I don't think I'm unique in that. I want it to go the way I want it to go and do the laws that I want, and I want feminist laws enacted that aren't, and all sorts of things. But on another level, I don't. I'm thinking of something that my son, when he was younger, was applying for a program in Jerusalem, and had to say what he thought was the biggest problem in Jerusalem. And with the wisdom of a 14-year-old, but sometimes 14-year-olds see things real clear, he said that the biggest problem Jerusalem has is that Jerusalem is very, very diverse, and people think that's a problem and don't know how to tap into that diversity to make it into an advantage that we can all learn from and all grow from. That's the best answer I have. I know it's not adequate, but we're not there yet. A country as divided as we are, eventually you get your way, I get my way. How long is that going to last? We have to learn to work together. Your parents were Jews? Right now you are. Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, I hope you didn't think I meant that I was conferring upon you a decision. In Jewish, I wouldn't presume to do that. In Israel right now, I had to bring my parents were also, they didn't have birth certificates. I brought witnesses who knew them in order to marry in Israel. It depends. It depends on the atmosphere. It depends on who's running the ministries and how generous the overall attitude is or is not. What I can say is, though, that if you were converted by a as an example, by a non-ultra-Orthodox rabbi approved by the Israeli ministry, they're approving now who here is a rabbi, your child would not be considered a Jew. The grandfather clause is going to quickly cut out a generation because most of us can't prove very much about our grandparents, especially and your generations that lost our grandparents. I don't have grandparents. I have a picture of my grandfather in a capota. Yeah, absolutely. They part of, as I said, first of all, the much of the campaign was on, as we call it, to Bibi or not to Bibi, and in fact, Gantz, Benny Gantz, who went into the coalition with Bibi in the previous government, the one from 2019. Lost a lot of credibility for that. Right now, it's a bit toxic if you were on the center left to support Netanyahu. That's true. If Netanyahu, though, is having too much trouble with some of the demands of these three other parties, and as we say, as you eat, you get hungrier. They're beginning to really enjoy the idea that they're in charge. Or could be. Netanyahu might play, as we call it, a Gewalt, and go to the centrist parties and say, save me from them. My guess would be that they would not. It would be toxic. There is a scenario playing out that what he will do, Netanyahu, is form a government with these extremists and then let it fall and blame them. And that some of my concerns may not turn out at all because we could be in elections again. That is not an unreasonable scenario because he becomes interim prime minister. So it's complicated, but it would be advantageous for him to do that. So yeah, he had thought he would have a government by Wednesday, and he doesn't. On the other hand, will he go crawling to people like Lapid, who was his fiercest opponent, who would lose all credibility, couldn't run for anything if he agreed to go into this government. So we'll see. It's going to be interesting over the next few days. I thought this might happen, but I can't say that I really saw it coming. I thought he was going to have an easier time and that they would be more reasonable.
We have several questions that came in. We have a few minutes left, if you don't mind. A couple of questions that came in from those who are joining us on live stream. Again, we have just a couple of minutes left, but one, I'm just paraphrasing it a little bit. I hope it's fair to the person who asked the question. That certainly Netanyahu knows of the concerns of the diaspora community, especially the American diaspora community. There's no doubt that he's aware of it. How much does he care? How much does he care at this point?
I don't think he does. I think you know very well that he knew that there was tremendous support for Obama by the Jewish community when Obama was president, and he came and addressed the Congress and openly criticized the administration, which had never been done before, and put American Jews in a terrible position. I think that above all, right now, what he cares about is not going to jail.
And, okay. And the last question for the evening. I'm sorry. What is going to be the future of Israel's center left? You mentioned that in terms of the voting public, was almost half voted for center and left parties and half voted for center and right parties. But the electoral math shows really a crushing defeat for the center left. As a rabbi of the congregation, I'm not making the case for the center, the right, or the left. As a conservative rabbi, I embody them all simultaneously. But nonetheless, it was a crushing defeat for the center left in Israel. So what is their future? Is there a future, or will they have to be completely reorganized?
I think we'll have to, that we'll see a serious reorganization within the center left. I don't think it'll happen fast. And I think it'll include some of the things that I talked about, for instance, an increasing Jewish content, recognition of our collective heritage, this division between, human rights and Judaism, which is false. I think we'll manage to get past that. I would like to, how much am I being hopeful? Better alliances with the Arab parties. But I certainly think, from what I read and from what I speak and from what I feel, the center left has still a lot of thinking to do and a lot of homework to do. And I think that this is the perfect place to join. You have your experiences, we have ours. We have a lot to learn from each other. There are similarities and differences, which is, of course, the ideal situation to learn and to share and to care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We want to thank our guest, Eetta Prince-Gibson, for her explanation and analysis of Israel's recent elections. And I want to just not only thank her, but challenge all of us to join her in her call for greater involvement and greater sharing of our vision and views insofar as Israel is concerned. Because there are Jews throughout the world, but there's one Jewish homeland. And we are proud of Israel when things are looking good. We have to stand up for Israel, even when our particular visions that we may hold dear are not the ones being reflected in its current priorities. We have one Jewish homeland, and it deserves the respect, attention, and devotion of Jews throughout the world and all who care about the security of the Jewish people. And I agree with you, Eetta, we have to find the appropriate channels to share our support, but also our concerns. Let's prioritize that as we go forward into the new Jewish year. For those here in the sanctuary and those who are joining us via the miracle of live stream, thank you for joining us, and good evening. And again, minyan will begin on Zoom at 8:30 p.m. tonight. Please join us. Thanks for coming out. For those who are in the sanctuary who would like to join us on the Zoom in the Bodine Chapel, we're going to make our way over there in about 5 minutes. Thank you.